Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
The thing about family is, you don't really notice the slow rot until someone says something so petty, so cutting, that it slices through years of polite tolerance like a knife through the last dry slice of Thanksgiving turkey. That moment for me came on December 19th, around 4 in the afternoon, while I was juggling an end-of-year meeting on Zoom with my assistant texting me nonstop about shipping delays, and the landline ringing off the hook because my mother still insists on using the damn house phone like it's 1998. I answered Dad's call mostly out of obligation, not affection. The man doesn't call to chat. He calls to deliver announcements or subtle jabs disguised as advice. And this time, it was both. I put him on speaker while half-scanning an invoice and said, "Hey, Dad. Everything okay?" He skipped the small talk, as usual. His voice had that familiar dry rasp, the one that always made me think of static on an old radio. "Look," he said, like he was preparing to hand me a speeding ticket. "We've been talking and maybe you should skip Christmas this year. It's just for achievers." I stopped typing. My fingers hovered in the air like I'd forgotten what they were for. "What?" I asked, thinking maybe I'd misheard. Maybe he meant overachievers or something else, something less mean-spirited. But no. He repeated it, slower this time, like I was the dumb one in this exchange. "Christmas is for achievers, Ratch. People who've put their families first. It's not a competition, but, you know." And that was it. No build-up. No joke afterward to soften the blow. Just the cold delivery of judgment dressed as wisdom from a man who once made me skip my senior prom so I could drive my brother to football camp. I didn't say anything right away. I sat there, mouth open, watching the meeting continue silently on the screen as people discussed marketing goals for next quarter. I stared at a woman's PowerPoint about customer retention, but all I could hear was my father's voice echoing in my head, "Just for achievers." Funny thing is, I've been the financial backbone of this family for years. My brother, Tom, hasn't held a steady job since 2015, but he's got 3 kids and somehow still manages to afford fantasy football and beer subscriptions. Guess who's been paying for his kids' dance classes, soccer gear, piano lessons, and summer camp? That would be me. Rachel. The family bank. And I never complained. Not really. Not when Debbie, his wife, forgot to thank me for the gymnastics tuition. Not when Dad called Tom such a great provider even though I was literally the one providing. So I sat there, stewing in silence, while Dad told me how Tom's oldest got picked as captain of the JV team and how, you wouldn't understand, you don't have kids, like that was a character flaw and not a choice I made for my own sanity. I let him ramble until he said, "Well, just think about it," and hung up like that was some gracious offer. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I closed the Zoom window mid-meeting, muttered, "I'll circle back on this," and turned off my laptop. I sat on the couch for a full 10 minutes, staring at the blank TV screen, wondering how the hell I became the villain in a family where I'd been the most reliable one. Then something in me snapped. Not in a screaming, throwing plates kind of way. No, this was a quiet snap. The kind of clean break that only happens when you realize the people closest to you have been living rent-free in your goodwill for too damn long. I pulled up my Venmo app and looked at the recurring transfer, $600 a month to Debbie Green, labeled Activities for the Kids. I hovered for a second, then hit cancel. The screen asked me to confirm. I did. Just like that, the gravy train had pulled into its final stop. My phone buzzed almost instantly. Debbie, of course. "Payment failed? Is everything okay?" I let the message sit. No reply. No explanation. Let them figure it out like I've had to figure out everything else. And if you're thinking this is some overreaction to a grumpy old man's offhand comment, maybe you're one of the lucky ones who grew up with a family that actually valued you for who you are, not just for what you could do for them. See, I grew up learning that being helpful was the closest thing to being worthy. Tom got the trophies. I got handed the responsibility. When I got a scholarship, Dad said, well, it's not a full ride, is it? When I bought my first house, he asked, in that neighborhood? When I got promoted, he asked if I was still thinking of settling down, like the only kind of success that counted involved a husband and 2 kids with gluten allergies. I guess I kept paying for Tom's kid stuff because I thought maybe, deep down, they'd see me as part of the family. That maybe Dad would finally say, Ratch really came through for us. But no. Apparently, I hadn't achieved enough to earn a plate at the table. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat in bed, and opened Facebook. That's when I saw the post. Debbie had uploaded a smiling photo of their kids decorating cookies, with the caption, "Some people are generous until it doesn't benefit them anymore. LOL. No tags. No names. But come on. Who else would that be about?" I stared at it for a long minute. Then I clicked Save Photo, just in case I needed the receipt. Because this wasn't just about Christmas. This wasn't about a canceled transfer. This was about all the times I swallowed it down, played the good soldier, and kept the peace while they treated me like a damn utility bill. Well, utilities been shut off. Merry Christmas. The text came in before I'd even finished my morning coffee, sharp and unfiltered like most things Debbie says when she's not trying to pretend we're some loving, tight-knit family. Why did gymnastics get canceled? No greeting. No punctuation beyond the pair of exclamation marks, as if outrage was more important than clarity. I stared at the message, let it sit on the lock screen, and took another sip of coffee while the cat climbed onto the counter like he owned the place. I wasn't ready yet. Not to deal with her, not to explain myself, not to have the same conversation where I'm expected to absorb the blame for something that was never my job in the first place. Another buzz. Then another. Debbie again. Lily's coach says the payment didn't go through. What's going on? Then, like clockwork, Tom. What the hell, Ratch? You're punishing the kids now. He had the nerve to include a sad face emoji. Like, I'm supposed to crumble over that. I hadn't even had time to process how fast they were coming at me. No pause, no curiosity, just demands, as if I had accidentally dropped the ball on some professional obligation I'd signed up for willingly. I finally texted back one sentence. I'm not their parent. You are. I didn't get a reply for a full hour, which told me that message hit exactly the spot I'd aimed for. The silence was louder than the 3 texts they'd sent back-to-back before it. I could practically see Tom pacing in his garage, probably beer in one hand and phone in the other, trying to figure out what angle to guilt-trip me from next. And Debbie? She was probably already crafting some pity post for her mommy group chat about how people can change on you when you least expect it. And honestly, I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel guilty. Not right away, anyway. I sat there and thought about the years I'd been covering camp fees, paying for braces, signing up for school supply drives under fake donor names, just so the kids wouldn't feel like the poor kids. I paid for sports uniforms, music lessons, even a damn school play costume that cost more than my senior prom dress. Over 5 years, it had to be, $2,500 a year? Yeah, 5 years, so that's like $11,000, right? Wait, no, that's not right. It's $12,500. Jesus. I can do business math in my sleep, but now I'm sitting here like a deer in the headlights trying to total the tab I've quietly covered so nobody else had to. Not even a thank you card. Not even a decent cup of coffee when I visited. Just a quiet expectation that Rachel would always come through, because she always has. I stared at the phone and thought about calling Mom. Not because I thought she'd back me up, but because I still carried that desperate, pitiful hope that one day she'd say, "You're right. You've done enough." So I dialed. She picked up on the 3rd ring, voice warm but guarded, like she already knew the storm was brewing. "Hi, sweetie," she said, drawing it out like honey. I told her about the texts, about how I canceled the transfer, about what Dad said. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear the ticking of the old kitchen clock behind her. Then finally, she said, "Well, maybe just talk to your father. You know how he gets." Like that was supposed to be comforting. Like I hadn't been talking to how he gets for 44 years. I said nothing for a second, trying not to let the exhaustion in my voice betray me. I did talk to him, Mom. That's the problem. She gave a little sigh, the kind that usually came before, he didn't mean it, or you know he loves you in his own way. But this time, she said nothing. Maybe because she knew she couldn't spin this into something gentle. Maybe because she knew I was finally done being the doormat with a bow on it. When I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there with my coffee going cold and my heart beating in a way that felt foreign and electric, like I'd finally switched on a part of myself that had been asleep since high school. I wasn't the villain in this story. I was the one who paid for the stage, bought the costumes, and then got told not to bother showing up for opening night. And I guess what really pissed me off the most was how quickly the gratitude disappeared. Not that there had ever been much, but now that the money stopped flowing, I was suddenly the wicked aunt who abandoned her family. Like the kids were pawns in some game I never agreed to play. Around 4 in the afternoon, I got the voicemail. I saw Dad's name flash on the screen, and I didn't even hesitate. I didn't let it ring out. I just watched it come and go, then waited a few minutes for the voicemail transcription to load. The first line made my stomach turn. I hope you're happy. Always a great opener. And then, you've ruined Christmas. No hello. No attempt at understanding. Just blame, served cold. As if a single sentence could erase all the holidays I spent sitting next to his recliner, pretending to enjoy conversations where my job, my life, my choices were just placeholders until Tom walked in and gave the room something real to celebrate. I saved the voicemail. Not to listen to again, but because something in me knew I'd need the proof later. Not for them. For me. For the part of me that still second guesses, still wants to believe I'm overreacting, still tries to see the best in people who've only ever seen me as useful. But that part of me? She's not answering texts anymore. I've always kept receipts, literal and emotional, but I never really sat down and tallied them until that Thursday night when the house was quiet and I could finally hear myself think. The texts had died down. Tom must have retreated to his hole, and Debbie was probably rage cleaning their kitchen in passive-aggressive silence. I opened a fresh notebook, the kind I usually saved for quarterly planning at work, and across the top, I wrote 3 words in big capital letters: the favor ledger. I underlined it twice, like a title in a novel that hadn't been written yet. Because in a way, that's what this was, a personal history of all the silent, invisible, unpaid work I'd done to keep the cracks in our family from splitting wide open. I started with the easy stuff. 5 years of monthly payments, $2,500 per year, $12,500 total. I listed them out by activity: gymnastics for Lily, soccer for Miles, piano lessons for Evan, summer camp deposits every March. Then I added the back-to-school shopping I'd surprised them with every August. I always said it was no big deal, but somehow Target runs added up when you were buying for 3 growing kids who needed everything from shoes to calculators. I estimated that at another $4,000, probably more, if I counted the last-minute overnight shipping costs Debbie insisted on because Evan needed his uniform by Friday. Then I added the car. Tom's first car. Not his first good car, or his first one he bought with his own paycheck. No, his first car, period. I gave him $2,000 toward that piece of junk because Dad said he needed wheels to get to work, and I, being the helpful older sister, had saved up exactly that much from my college summer job doing inventory at a warehouse that smelled like sweat and cardboard. I'd planned to use it to buy my own used laptop and pay the deposit for my off-campus housing, but that didn't happen. Instead, I moved into a shoebox of a dorm room and borrowed my roommate's computer until midterms. And Tom? He wrecked that car within 9 months and never paid me back. Not one penny. Not one apology. That one hurt more than I admitted at the time, and writing it down made something twist in my stomach, rage or regret. I couldn't tell anymore. I kept going, flipping through mental files, remembering birthdays where I covered the cake, the candles, the gifts. I even remembered paying for a replacement flute after Miles left his on the school bus and Debbie said, "We're kind of tight this month. Can you help us out just this once?" That was 3 years ago. Just this once had become just every time. I paused and stared at the list. It was almost absurd now, how long it had gotten. Nearly $20,000 if I was being conservative, and yet the moment I stopped, I was labeled selfish. I leaned back in my chair, flipped the pen in my fingers, and thought about one Christmas in particular, the year Tom gave a toast. We were all sitting around the table, the air heavy with the smell of baked ham and cranberry sauce, and he stood up with his wine glass and said, "To the people who make this family whole, Dad, Mom, and Debbie. And to the kids, of course." That was it. My name wasn't even mentioned. Not a word. I had bought half the gifts under the tree, paid for the kids' new winter coats, and even cooked one of the side dishes. But I was invisible. It wasn't the forgetting that hurt. It was knowing he hadn't forgotten. I just hadn't mattered. The memory lit a fire under me, one that had been smoldering quietly under years of obligation and silence. I needed to talk it through with someone who wasn't going to give me another version of "just let it go." So I booked a last-minute session with my therapist, Dr. Larson, who was the first person in my adult life who didn't talk over me, down to me, or around me. We spoke over video, my face washed out in laptop glow. I told her everything, about the favor ledger, about the car, the toast, the voicemail from Dad. And then I asked her the question that had been stuck in my throat for days. If I stop helping, if I stop showing up, does that make me cruel? She didn't answer right away, just nodded like she was weighing the truth before delivering it. Then she said, "Helping is only kindness when it's a choice, not when it's an expectation. If you're expected to give, it's not generosity, it's servitude." That sentence landed like a hammer to the chest. I sat with it, tasting it like medicine, bitter, but necessary. And in that moment, something in me snapped again, just like it had when Dad told me to skip Christmas. Only this time, it wasn't pain that followed. It was clarity. I didn't want to scream. I didn't want to argue. I didn't even want an apology anymore. I wanted a response that was clean, undeniable, and final. A move so deliberate that they couldn't twist it into drama or misunderstanding. Something that would leave them stunned into silence. I didn't want revenge that looked like revenge. I wanted revenge that looked like control. That's when I remembered the car. Not Tom's first one, but the one I'd co-signed for last year when their van broke down. Debbie had called me crying, said the kids needed a ride to school and Tom was trying so hard. I'd signed the loan out of guilt, and the car had been in both our names since then. I paid the down payment, Tom took the keys, and everyone moved on. I opened my email, found my accountant's contact, and typed a message that felt colder than anything I'd written in years. "Hi, question. What's the tax penalty for gifting a car to a family member and then reclaiming it? Asking for a very patient sister." Then I hit send. And I smiled. Christmas morning arrived colder than usual, both outside and inside my bones, though the weather wasn't to blame for the chill. I woke up alone in my house, no garland, no fake pine needles on the rug, no oven warming up with cinnamon rolls or holiday casseroles. For the first time in over 20 years, I wasn't running around trying to buy last-minute toys I wasn't thanked for, or gift cards for kids who barely looked up from their phones when I walked through the door. The silence in my house was so heavy it almost buzzed. I sat on the couch in sweatpants, hair a mess, holding a mug of coffee with both hands like it was the only solid thing left in the world, and I didn't feel sad. I felt aware. I felt like I'd finally landed in my own life. Around 10:30, the first notification buzzed on my phone. I ignored it. Then another. And another. By the time I looked, I had 3 texts from friends tagging me in a photo Tom had just posted to Facebook. There it was, my family's living room, the same one I'd spent every Christmas morning in since I was old enough to hold a stocking. The tree was over-decorated as usual, with tinsel drooping like silver tears, and in the center of the room was the dining table, set for 6, but with one conspicuous, empty chair at the end. I knew that chair. I'd sat in it every year, refilling wine glasses, slicing ham, and biting my tongue. The caption read, "Some people forget the meaning of family." No names. No direct call-out. But everybody knew who that was aimed at. It was a digital dagger wrapped in a Christmas bough, and I could practically hear Debbie in the background going, "Don't tag her, it'll look too obvious." But obvious was the point. He wanted me to see it. He wanted me to feel it. So I didn't comment. I didn't message. I didn't react. I simply opened my text messages and sent one message to the family group chat. That chair? It's empty because I finally chose myself. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. First came Debbie, rattling off something about, "How dare you make this about you," followed by a long paragraph that I didn't read past the second sentence. Then Tom, who hasn't written more than 3 words in a group chat since he learned how to spell, suddenly found the energy to tell me I was tearing the family apart. And then, of course, Dad. His message was a masterclass in emotionally constipated outrage. He called me selfish, dramatic, not the daughter I raised, and ended it with, "You always have to ruin things when it's not about you." I read that line 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because it perfectly summed up everything I'd ever felt growing up in that house. Everything was about Tom, his needs, his wins, his failures, his messes. And when it wasn't about Tom, it was about making sure we didn't upset Tom. And when it finally became about me, it was apparently me making it all about myself. So I replied with a photo. Just a single image. It was taken an hour earlier, and I'd saved it just for this moment. The tow truck pulling up in front of Tom's driveway, the red Honda I'd helped finance being winched up onto the flatbed. I had waited for confirmation before sending it, and now it felt like the cleanest move I'd ever made. The caption read, "You wanted a lesson about consequences. Consider this a masterclass." That car had been in my name from day one. I had the paperwork. I had the emails. And more importantly, I had the nerve to follow through. What followed in the group chat was mostly noise. Accusations. Guilt. Demands. Debbie tried to play lawyer, saying I had no right. Tom accused me of ruining Christmas for the kids, as though a vehicle registered under my name was suddenly sacred family property. Dad, predictably, stayed on the high horse, insisting I was taking revenge on children and losing touch with what matters. But none of them mattered in that moment. Not like the message that came through privately 30 minutes later. It was from Miles, Tom's middle kid, the quiet one, the one I always had a soft spot for. His message was short. "Aunt Rachel, why are you doing this?" That one landed differently. Because he wasn't angry. He wasn't snide. He was confused. And for the first time since this whole saga started, I hesitated. Not because I regretted anything, but because I suddenly saw the face of someone who genuinely didn't understand the way adults weaponize silence, favors, and expectations. I thought about replying. I even typed something out, something simple and vague like, "Sometimes grown-ups need to stop being stepped on." But I deleted it. Not because I didn't want to say it, but because he wouldn't understand it yet. Not fully. Maybe one day. Instead, I closed the message and set the phone down on the counter. I stood in my kitchen and stared at my reflection in the dark window, the outline of someone who had given everything and finally decided to give to herself. And just when I thought the storm might pass for the day, just when I reached for the TV remote to put on a movie and pretend it was just another lazy Sunday, another notification popped up. Facebook again. This time from Dad. It was a public post. Not private. Not in the family group. Not even a direct message. It read, "My daughter turned her back on family. She's dead to me." 7 words. No punctuation. No shame. Just a cold, ugly sentence for the world to see. I didn't comment. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Because you don't mourn a death that feels like freedom. The day after Christmas, I found myself sitting in a small coffee shop downtown, one of those places with mismatched chairs and chipped mugs that smelled like strong espresso and overambition. There were no carolers outside, No artificial cheer, no laughter echoing through the air, just the low murmur of two students arguing about finals in the corner and the hiss of the espresso machine spitting steam like it was tired of performing. I sat in the booth by the window with a cup of plain black coffee cooling in my hands, staring out at a city that had already started shedding the gloss of the holidays. Tinsel sagged on street lamps, and storefronts looked like tired party guests waiting for someone to come clean up the mess. It was the perfect place for solitude, the kind that doesn't come from being left behind but from walking away on purpose. I opened my purse, pulled out the small black notebook, the favor ledger, and flipped through its pages slowly, like I was reading a memoir someone else had written. Page after page, line after line, dollar after dollar, gift after gift. There it all was, written in plain ink. No exaggeration. No emotion. Just numbers and events and sacrifices that had never once been acknowledged. I stared at the final entry from the night before and added one last line at the bottom, right beneath the car retrieval and the school tuition notes. Peace of mind. Priceless. And it was. Not because I'd won some battle or scored some final blow, but because I had finally stopped lying to myself about who they were and what I meant to them. I had spent decades thinking if I just gave enough, proved enough, stayed small enough, and smiled at the right times, that maybe, just maybe, my father would turn to me one day and say, "I'm proud of you." Not proud because I picked up the slack or paid for the messes or kept everyone else comfortable, but proud of me, the woman I became in spite of it all. But that moment never came. I remembered the night I won my first major business award, a statewide honor for small business leadership that took 5 years of blood, sweat, and more 15-hour days than I care to admit. I had flown to Chicago for the ceremony, wore a dress I couldn't really afford at the time, and stood on that stage with a glass plaque in my hand and a spotlight on my face. I sent Dad a photo afterward, grinning ear to ear with the award held high. His reply? "Tom's coaching the soccer team now. That's real achievement. He's making a difference in kids' lives." That was the moment it finally clicked. That I could buy a house, start a business, support a family that wasn't even mine, and still somehow come in second to a man who couldn't hold a job for more than 8 months. Because Tom didn't have to prove anything. He was the son. The default. The golden boy. And I was just the one they leaned on when things got tight, praised only in private, and expected to vanish when the spotlight turned. I sipped the now lukewarm coffee and opened my laptop. I stared at the blank email window, hands hovering over the keyboard, before typing out the final note I would ever send to my father. No apology. No bargaining. Just honesty, clear and cold. "You were right, Dad. Christmas is for achievers. That's why I'm skipping it. I've already achieved something you never will, clarity." I hit send before I could second guess it, closed the laptop, and felt the tension in my shoulders begin to lift, as if I had peeled off a coat I didn't realize I'd been wearing for 40 years. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. But it was a clean kind of hollow, like clearing out a room that had been filled with junk for too long. Sometimes, an empty space is better than a crowded one filled with resentment and fake smiles. That night, I didn't cook a fancy dinner or pour wine into a glass just for show. I heated up leftover takeout, sat at the kitchen island, and let the silence sit with me like a familiar friend. The world outside was still lit up with the remnants of holiday cheer, but inside, things were finally quiet. I was alone, but not lonely. There's a difference most people don't understand until they've spent enough time being surrounded by the wrong kind of people. Around 8:30, my phone buzzed again. I assumed it was another comment on Dad's Facebook post, or maybe Debbie sending one last guilt trip wrapped in sugary language. But it wasn't. It was a text from Miles, the same nephew who had messaged me before with confusion rather than anger. It simply read, "I still love you. Can we talk sometime?" The words hit harder than I expected, because they weren't laced with manipulation or expectation. They weren't asking for money or explanations or apologies. They were just real. A flicker of light in a family that had grown so used to taking that they'd forgotten how to connect. I stared at the message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I started to type, something soft, something open, but stopped halfway. I let my finger hang there before slowly setting the phone down on the table beside me. Some responses need time. Some messages deserve more than a reflex. I sat there with my eyes wet, a smile that didn't quite reach all the way, and the heavy, aching truth that sometimes doing the right thing still hurts like hell. But pain doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It just means you finally made one that was yours. Sometimes, choosing yourself feels like betrayal. But maybe it's just the first honest Christmas you've ever had.